Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're doing something kind of fun. We're going to build an entire economy from the ground up to understand exactly how a country measures its total production. If you've ever watched the news and heard politicians or financial analysts throwing around all these acronyms, you know that macroeconomics can sometimes feel like a completely foreign language. But we are taking the complex theories of national income and GDP accounting and making them clear, structured, and genuinely fascinating. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with Ravi building an economy, then look at the GDP solution, dive into 3 measurement methods, explore beyond borders with GNP and NNP, and finally tackle nominal, real, and inflation. All right, let's jump right into section 1. Ravi builds an economy. So I want you to imagine a guy named Ravi. He's building his own little world. At first, maybe he's just producing enough for himself, but pretty quickly, he's not alone anymore. He actually represents an entire sprawling nation. And that brings up a really massive question. When millions of people are doing millions of things, how on earth do we measure all that total production? Like, how do we calculate everything they do together in a way that actually makes sense? Because think about it, Ravi's expanded nation is absolutely booming. We've got farmers out in the fields producing raw wheat, heavy factories running day and night manufacturing physical goods, and a rapidly growing service sector, people at laptops doing IT and consulting. When you combine all of that, you get this massive, honestly kind of chaotic, web of daily production. And to figure out if his nation is actually thriving or struggling, that web desperately needs some sort of standardized measurement. Which brings us to section 2, the GDP solution. All right, gross domestic product, or GDP. This is literally the absolute foundation of macroeconomics. It's defined as the total value of final goods and services produced within a country in a given year. Now, the crucial thing here, the part you really want to memorize, are these 3 key constraints. We're talking final goods, the production has to happen within the country, and it must be within a specific time period, which is usually a year. So let's look at why that first constraint about final goods is so absolutely vital. This is actually a classic exam trap, so watch out. Say Ravi the farmer grows wheat, sells it to a miller to make flour, who then sells it to a baker to make bread. If we counted the value of all 3 of those stages, we'd be artificially inflating our numbers big time. It's a mathematical mistake called double counting. To get the true GDP, we just completely ignore those intermediate goods and only count the final good, the bread. Because, its final price already has the value of the wheat and flour baked right into it. Moving right along to section 3 measurement methods. Okay, so there are 3 primary methods you can use to arrive at the exact same national production total. Think of it like looking at a single building from 3 totally different angles. The production method simply sums up all the value added at each stage of creation. Then you have the income method, which looks at the money flowing into people's pockets, so the sum of all wages, rent, interest, and profit earned in Ravi's nation. And finally, the expenditure method, which calculates things by adding up all the money spent to buy those final goods. Now, out of those 3, the expenditure method is definitely the most widely used. Honestly, if you only remember one formula today from this explainer, make it this one right here. GDP equals C plus I plus G plus the result of X minus M. What that actually translates to is consumption by households plus investment by businesses plus government spending plus net exports, which, by the way, is just total exports minus total imports. It perfectly categorizes literally every single dollar spent in Ravi's economy. Let's zoom out a bit for section 4, beyond borders, GNP, and NNP. So GDP is strictly bound by geography, right? It only counts what is produced within the country's physical borders, no matter who is actually doing the producing. But GNP, gross national product, that cares about citizenship. It measures production by Ravi's citizens, even if they're living and working in another country entirely. To calculate GNP, we take our GDP and add something called net factor income from abroad, or NFFIA. The really crucial takeaway here is that if Ravi's citizens are earning more money abroad than foreigners are earning inside his country, his GNP is actually going to be higher than his GDP. But, well, we aren't quite done adjusting yet. Think about Ravi's bread factory for a second. Over a year of intense production, his heavy commercial ovens are going to suffer wear and tear. They literally lose value over time. And we call that depreciation. So as Ravi's machinery naturally wears down, we have to subtract that depreciation from our gross national product to find our NNP, the net national product. Whenever you hear the word net in economics, it almost always implies that a deduction has been made, which gives us a much more accurate, sustainable picture of the nation's actual wealth. Then we also have this really interesting tug of war between taxes and subsidies when we calculate GDP at factor cost versus market price. Factor cost is basically the raw cost to make something. Let's say it costs Ravi exactly $2 to bake a loaf of bread. But if the government slaps a $1 indirect tax on it, the market price that consumers actually pay at the register jumps up to $3. On the flip side, if the government gives Ravi a $1 subsidy to help him out, the factor cost is adjusted to reveal the true cost of production, completely removing that government interference. It's really all about stripping away taxes and subsidies to see what production actually costs at its core. All right, final stretch. Section 5, nominal, real, and inflation. Okay, so imagine Ravi's economy produces 100 loaves of bread this year, priced at $1 each. His GDP is $100. Easy, right? Well, what if next year he produces the exact same 100 loaves, but inflation pushes the price up to $2 a loaf? Suddenly, his GDP looks like it doubled to $200. But wait, did his country actually produce more? No, definitely not. And that right there is the danger of nominal GDP, because it uses current, everyday prices. To get to the actual truth, we have to look at real GDP, which uses constant base year prices to entirely remove the effect of inflation. If you ever see nominal GDP running much higher than real GDP, that's a massive red flag. It indicates high inflation in Ravi's economy, not necessarily more production. To track that exact discrepancy, economists use a really handy mathematical reality check called the GDP Deflator. By dividing nominal GDP by real GDP and multiplying by 100, this formula basically peels back the layers of price hikes. It shows us exactly how much prices have artificially inflated our current production numbers. It's a great tool because it allows us to just ignore the price tags for a minute and focus entirely on the actual physical growth of the economy. Now, before we wrap up, we really need to talk about what is completely left out of these calculations, because official GDP, it entirely ignores some pretty massive sectors of financial activity. For example, secondhand goods aren't counted, simply because they were already counted in the year they were originally produced. Transfer payments, think government pensions or student scholarships, those aren't counted either, because no new good or service is actually being produced in exchange. And of course, the massive shadow economy of black money and under-the-table cash transactions completely bypasses official accounting. So if Ravi is secretly running an underground, untaxed pastry ring, the official GDP formula definitely isn't going to catch it. Which leaves us with a really fascinating final question. Since GDP is so strictly defined, it obviously misses a tremendous amount of hidden activity. Don't get me wrong, it gives us an incredible, standardized baseline. But if official metrics are entirely missing black markets, informal transactions, and transfer payments, how perfectly do they really measure our actual lived economy? What other invisible forces are shaping Ravi's world? And our own? Keep that in mind the next time you see GDP numbers flashing on the news. Thanks for hanging out and learning with us today on The Explainer.